In this video, we're going to be going over list pagination. So static list pagination. All right. So on this platform, when you're working with lists or tables, you have the ability to have static pagination. You have the ability to have server-side pagination, and then you have the ability to have server-side scroll pagination. All right. And we're going to cover all three of these, but we're going to cover the static pagination, which is just the basic fundamental pagination in this video. All right, so we have our list item that we created in a previous video. We have connected a data set from our random data API. We pulled in 45 records. This is static. We basically copied and pasted this into our app data. So this is some static data at this moment. Here we basically dragged and dropped a list element, and we've mapped these fields and we've connected it to our user list data set. We've mapped different elements within our list elements. All right, and that's how we came up with this user interface. So if we go over the attributes of our list again, starting from the top, we have the app data field. So basically this is just the field in our app data that this list is binded to. This is where it gets its data source from. We have the manage data flow. It's set to false. When it's set to false, the system is going to use the app data field and do the binding on the mapping for us. And if it's set to true, then we have to basically provide that data by ourselves. All right. So we have a display limit here. By default, it's 10. You could set it to whatever you want it to be. We have a title, draggable, and non-reactive, which is what we're going to use for optimizations later on in future videos. All right, so in this video, we're going to go over pagination. All right, and here we're going to go over static pagination because our data set is static. All right, so we're just going to turn pagination on. And for the most part, that is it. We are done. As you can see, again, we have 45 records and we are displaying 10 records. And the reason why it's defaulting to 10 records is because our display limit is 10. If our display limit is 5, then when the page loads, it will default to 5 records in display. And then our pagination will probably show us about 9 pages or so. And if we scroll to the bottom here, we have our display limit options, which is basically what we have here, this drop down. We could change this to whatever options that we want our users to have, right, based on your application requirements. So when we turned on pagination, a few extra attributes basically became visible. So let's just go over these attributes and just know what they are. So we have one here called server-side pagination. So like I said, right now we're dealing with static pagination because we have static data. We already know the entire data set because it's static. So server-side pagination is what we're going to use whenever we are dealing with data sets from an external data source, like a database or like an external API. That is basically each page load is going to be pulling in data from an external source. That's going to be server-side pagination. We're going to cover that in an upcoming video. List pagination metadata field. So list pagination metadata field is just the field in our app data that holds our pagination metadata, which is like the page index, the number of rows to skip, the limits, right, or the page size. So these are your standard pagination attributes or metadata. So this field is going to hold that data. The total data row count. So this is basically just the total data set in our data set, right? The total number of records in our data set. So you can think of maybe a database query to a backend database, right? That database might have 1,000 records, but we're only pulling in 10 at a time, right? So if we, let's say, mapped this to a field in our app data that held the number of records, right? Let's say that if the records were like 1,000, the system is going to use this total data row count to determine how many pages should exist in our pagination workflow, all right? Linking the pagination to the router. This is basically just linking our pagination to the router. And that way, if we were to, let's say, get a link that had a list or a table that was linked to the router, when the page loads, the list is going to go to the page that the router points it to, right? And in this case, it's true, but it's actually false by default. And I actually turned this on before this video started. All right. And I believe that's it for new ones. If you have the link pagination to router on, then there's another field here, basically called the pagination router ID. So this will be the field in our router that would point to the correct page index. So while I have this on, I can just quickly navigate to page 2. As you can see, we have that reflected here. If I were to go ahead and refresh our page, right, when it loads to page 2 because our router says, hey, this page should load, this list should load to page 2. All right. So that's pretty much the router linking in a nutshell. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead, jump back into our list item or our list elements. And we're just going to go back over here. We're going to extend this. We're going to say we want to see 5. We want to show 5 at a time. And as you can see, now that we're showing 5, the system automatically recalculates and tells us that we have 9 pages. If we're to, let's say, switch to 50, right? Then we only have the 1 page, because remember that we only have about 45 records, as can be seen in our list row index. All right. So in a nutshell, that is pretty much it for pagination when we're dealing with static data sets. It's as simple as just turning pagination on, right? Because of the data set is static, meaning that the system has all the records. We know everything about the record. You don't need to do anything in extra. If you wanted to say maybe you wanted this list to be defaulting to 5 initial rows, you could just change the display limit here to 5, right? Save that. And whenever it loads, right, it's going to load with 5, right? And if you wanted to set the initial display to 10, right, you can just set that display limit to 10. It could be whatever value you want, as long as you have the appropriate display limit selectors, right? All right, that's it for static pagination for list elements. See you in the next video.